This video will walk you through creating a Java GUI application that has input processing and output. Start up the NetBeans IDE, choose New Project, and Java Desktop Application. Pay attention to the project name, give it something descriptive if you'd like, and pay attention to the project save location. In the design pane, you're going to add a label, and we're just going to have a simple program that adds two numbers together. So we need to be able to prompt the user as to what to enter. So we'll do this with the label. Feel free to pause, rewind, and replay this video as much as you need to. Just editing the text. You should design the layout of your form before you even sit down and start working with this program with the NetBeans. You can draw this out on paper or in another program if you want to quickly get an idea of what the form should look like. We have to be able to get input from the user, so we're going to use a text box or a text field control. Looks nice if they're both the same size. We don't want any text in the text field when the program starts. And since we're going to be using these text fields in code, it's a good idea to rename them. It'll be easier for you when you're typing the code, and it will also make the code more readable. Button, we want to change the text on that so the user knows what's going to happen when they click it. And we need somewhere to put the output that gets generated from the calculation. Again, we're going to use this label in code, so I'm going to give it a good descriptive name. And I'm going to let the user know that that's where the output is going to be. So I'm going to set a label next to that label that the user will see to know where to expect to see the result. We don't use that label in code, so there's no need to set the name property on that. Double-clicking the button, and I'm going to create a new action for what happens when this button gets clicked. I can call it whatever I want. It's a method that I'm assigning here. And what is the method really going to do? It's going to get the sum. So any name you want, start with a lowercase, capitalize each additional word. All right, so this is the module, or the method that got created. We have a header. We just need to make the body. We need somewhere to put what the user entered. We need a variable. The IDE is going to help you fix syntax errors. Whenever something's underlined, check to see what the underline means. All right, the green underline is not bad. That's just a warning that a variable is not being used. But red underlines are going to give you information about more serious errors. All right, so we create a variable to hold what the user entered, and we want to get what they entered into the text from the text box. And we want to store that in our variable num1, which is capable of holding an integer. You'll notice that Java wants to have a semicolon at the end of all the lines of code. Also, we have an error that there's incompatible types. It won't let me assign to my int variable whatever's in the text box, or just the text box name itself. I have to get the text that's inside of the text box. The text box itself is just a control, but there's a method that gets the text from the text box. And we have some hints from the IDE to show us the syntax. And we still have a complaint here. The get text, if you read that screen, returns a string. I don't want a string. I need an integer variable. Also, get in the habit of declaring or adding comments to your lines of code to help you think about what's going on, help you to understand it if you come back and look at this program later, or if somebody else needs to modify it later. You create a comment with 2 forward slashes. So what we're trying to do is store what the user entered in the text boxes. We want to store that in a variable so we can perform a calculation on it. And it says incompatible type, right? We're trying to save to an integer variable, and we've got a string from the text box. So we can use this method called integer or parseInt. Integer.parseInt is a method that accepts a string and returns an integer. So the string that we want it to send to it is the text from our text box. So that's what's going inside the parentheses. That method's going to return an integer, and that's going to be saved in my num1 variable. Once we got that syntax all worked out, we want to do the same thing for num2. We want to get the text from the text box called text num2, send that to parseInt to get the integer value from it. Now we need somewhere to hold the sum that we get from this calculation. So I'm going to create a variable called sum. It's a type integer, and I'm just going to assign to sum num1 plus num2. You could do this program without the variables, but this just makes it a little bit more straightforward. And I'll add another comment here because that line of code wasn't storing what the user entered in the text box. That line of code was performing a calculation. It's going to leave one blank line between each major section of code. Now we want to assign the sum to the label so the user sees the output. So you might think you just do label sum get sum, but you get the incompatible types error again in Java. You can't assign an integer to a label itself. We need to set it to the text that's inside of the label. So we can use the set text, but that accepts a string. And sum is not a string. So even when I do this, I'm going to get another error. And the error has to do with the fact that sum is an integer. So we need to get this integer into a string. So similar to the way we did integer.parseInt, we can do integer.toString. And we can send num, or we can send sum as the argument to that method. And we're going to get the same value, but as a string as a result. And now our label sum.setText isn't complaining to us. We don't have the red line anymore. So let's see if this program actually runs. And sure enough, looks good.